Hey Mel, have you ever thought about starting your own charity?
Yeah, and I'm still thinking about it, but I just need to do a bit more research. I suppose Adriana talked about it today, that creating a charity or, putting together your social change idea, it should be an intersection between your passion and your resources. So how you go about it is actually to think in the way of how likely are you to start at this?
Yeah, totally. And research is such a key part of it. There's the amount of times where I see projects, out there on like Facebook or Kickstarter or crowdfunding or whatever. And I just think if people had just done some really simple Googling, they'd actually realize that there's lots of people out there working towards the same cause as them. And perhaps if they were to join forces with them, whether that's through monetary support or volunteering, they could actually have a bigger impact. I guess it's sort of a realization that passion as a driver by itself is not sustainable.
Absolutely. And even when you do find that gap in the market, you still need to convince people that your heart is in the right place.
Yeah, and Adrianna spoke about that in the episode today, about how just because she's passionate about something doesn't mean that a natural next step would be for her to start a charity around the cause, even though she's been very successful in doing that. And that's an important lesson for people to take away, that passion isn't everything. You need resources.
And then you need to convince others that your heart is in the right place. Welcome to the Human Factor, the show where we explore social change through the eyes of social entrepreneurs and nonprofit advocates. My name is Melanie Roussin, her name is Erin McKay, and we are your hosts.
Today we talk to Adrianna Tan, a CEO based in Jakarta in Singapore, a food lover and a multiple award winner in the not-for-profit and financial technology sector. Adrianna is part of our launch series where we explore the spark, that idea that launches someone to create social change.
Let's start the show. So with titles like CEO and founder and taking out awards all over Asia, you've built yourself quite an impressive CV, Adrianna. You've worked for household names like Uber, but also started a foundation in India and are now tackling change, social change through technology. But what we're wondering, Adrianna, is how would you describe yourself?
I'm just a professional busybody. I see something that I can do, and I just think, of course, I have to do it. And I think I previously didn't know how to stop and think about what I was actually getting into until it's too late. So, yeah, professional dabbler, busybody would be the best way to describe what I do.
And so with so many projects that you're working on across so many areas and also across different countries, what does a typical day actually look like for you?
I don't have one. I don't have a typical day. I think that's why I do what I do. I wake up and then I go to work at my tech startup, which is based in both Jakarta and Singapore. So depending on where I am at that point of the week, I might be in either country at either office. And then I go get on Slack, which is what we use across all of my teams. It's helped me manage a lot of things that I do. And then I might do a combination of things from programming to marketing to really a whole bunch of things that need my attention. But lately I'm trying to get to a groove where I'm able to delegate work to others and just focus on doing the things that I do best, which is selling the dream.
Have you found that really difficult, the act of delegation?
Yeah, that's been one of the hardest things. I think that maybe entrepreneurs get into what they do because they're absolute control freaks. And I think I probably was for a very long time. But I've come around to the idea that, I can only do more with my time if I get into a groove where I can delegate and be okay with that.
Absolutely.
Very much so. So when I see successful entrepreneur like yourself, I often wonder what was the spark that started it all? So for you, Adrianna, what was the decisive moment that led you to be a part of social change?
Well, growing up in a place like Singapore where we are pretty comfortable, but at the same time, my grandparents lived through different wars. They lived through different occupations. They had 4 citizenships foisted on them without them choosing those citizenships. I feel like a lot of the things that happened in my childhood had some undertone of, there was some poverty for sure. There were underprivileged people around us at all times. It wasn't just this gleaming big city that you see and hear about in the news. There were always all kinds of things that had to be done to help somebody. And so for me, it was a natural intersection of doing business as well as doing nonprofit work that I felt out of here made a lot of sense. And so the spark for me was just seeing how my parents and my grandparents grew up, taking in kids from the neighborhood, giving them free tuition. All of these things just made it seem so natural and obvious that we just had to do things that could benefit other people.
And I suppose that, I mean, I think you're touching on poverty and a little bit of education and for our listener as well. So your foundation in India is about education. So what was it about education, especially that you saw as a bit of the doorway out of poverty, I suppose?
Yeah, so in a place like India, where I've been doing some work for the last 10 years, 3 years ago, I decided to join forces with some friends to start a foundation. Initially, it was a crowdfunding project, but then it took on a life of its own. And we felt that despite our different backgrounds, we were able to achieve what we were personally able to do only because of education. And we wanted other people to be able to access that same quality of education as well. So in India, there is a lot of demand for education. It's not that parents don't want to send their kids to school. It's just that when resources are limited, they're going to go, okay, maybe some of my kids, usually the boys, are going to go to a good school and everybody else can just not bother about it. We wanted to try to break that cycle and to say, okay, stop worrying about that. We'll send your girls to school. We'll take care of them. We'll give them after-school activities. We'll teach them the code. We'll teach them how to express themselves. And we truly believe that that is the only way for a family to lift itself out of poverty is when a woman in that family is able to get herself educated. They have a better shot at life.
Absolutely. And so when you set up the foundation in India, what challenges did you face in setting it up? And do you think that those challenges were specific to India or for all not-for-profits?
Yeah, so some of the most difficult challenges with regards to setting up a nonprofit, no matter where you are, is convincing people that your heart is in the right place and that when money is concerned, many people have differing views on how you should spend that. So it's strange because in the business world where I come from, if I raise money from an investor, I get pretty much an autonomous say in how to spend that money as long as I deliver certain results financially. So it's a very clear transaction that takes place in the business world. That doesn't exist in the nonprofit world because there's so many different models of participating in a nonprofit. There's so many different ways to set up one. So we face the issue of how do we set ourselves up in a way where our donors could be aligned with what we believed in when so many different people have a different viewpoint on how something could be done. Many donors were obviously not from the same socioeconomic background as some of our girls. And even if they were Indian, even if they were from the same country, the same city, tended to come from a more upper or middle class background in which they felt that if you throw money at a problem, of course the girls should do better at school. Many of our girls are first generation learners. They don't have room physically in the houses or lights even to study sometimes. And by paying for the school fees, that was just a first step out of this cycle, and it's not an immediate process. So sometimes it was difficult to explain why the girls were not immediately becoming A-star students to a lot of our donors. And I think this is something that many early nonprofits face, that they're going to have to think about how to communicate that there are all of these different changes, but it's going to take time.
That's such a good point.
Actually, we're just nodding along as we're listening to you, Adrianna. You make some very, very good point. So if we compare, your experience in terms of having this nonprofit in India with your social enterprise in Indonesia, Do you think that one model is easier than the other? So just, based on your answer, for example, I'm getting the feel that a social enterprise model might be a little bit easier than a non-for-profit, would you say?
I think the jury's still out on that. There's a lot of talk.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk in the business world, in the nonprofit world, in the social enterprise world regarding what's the best way. But I really think it's all about context. You can't just take a very strong philosophical, ideological stance and say that to solve problem A, you always have to do what you do in the world of business or only do it in the way nonprofits have always done things. I would like to see more of the open mind, more of experimentation with the eye on results and changing things if they don't work, rather than 5-year plans that spend a lot of money but don't necessarily have the same impact. But at the same time, I think that there's also many things that the nonprofit world has accomplished, for which many of the so-called tech bros who are very libertarian and anarchist and all of those things don't give enough credit to.
Absolutely. Yeah. The idea of one being better than the other, it depends on who you talk to as well.
Definitely. Definitely. And I suppose, we asked the question because some people may be waiting the two options, and trying to find out which one it might be better for them. And what you're saying is, it really depends on the context and what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. It also depends on how much skin you've got in the game, right? So if you're trying to solve a problem sitting in a very comfortable office, it doesn't matter what model you pick, it's not going to work. You've got to go onto the ground regardless of which approach you end up with.
Absolutely.
Very true.
And so I wanted to ask you a little bit more about WOBE. It's a really innovative concept and one that wouldn't have been able to exist, 10 or even 5 years ago. So how did you come up with the idea of connecting this smartphone technology with social change for women in Indonesia?
So I was traveling and working around different parts of Southeast Asia for the last couple of years. And in each place, I never stayed long enough to get a postpaid phone connection. So I was essentially a migrant worker of some sort, just that I wore different clothes probably. And I saw for myself how this prepaid economy was so different from the world of postpaid developed countries the world over, that even in a place like Singapore and the US, the idea of prepaid or pay as you go is something that stays very much within the realms of the people who come from a different place or who don't have enough resources, don't have a permanent address or visa, things like that. So I became very fascinated about these things from a philosophical point of view, but also commercially and technologically. I had been working with some telcos on building up their communities in places like Myanmar. And so it was when I was in Myanmar for a year in 2013 to 2014 that I saw the rise of cell phones across the country. When I landed there, a SIM card cost $2,500 for one. And then it got down to $250, and that was actually when I got one. And then now, if you land at the airport, you get a SIM card for $1.50 with quite a lot of data in it. And so that was very fascinating to see this once-in-a-lifetime transition to a country that was experiencing everything in supersonic speed. And from that experience, I got to know some people who worked in the telco world who were able to help me out in putting together this crazy idea that I had. So with WOBE, what I ended up doing was I went to Indonesia to build up this platform that was going to enable anybody with a smartphone to start a small business. That also came from years of ground experience on the ground in places like Indonesia and Myanmar, where I saw that informal entrepreneurship was seen as not just a ticket out of poverty, but also seen as something that you just have to do.
I mean, you've obviously done a great job in leveraging technology rather than letting it be a barrier for you. What advice, Adrianna, would you give to those less tech savvy, like myself, for example, about how to get technology working for us? So, I mean, you touch on, the need to surround yourself with people maybe in that space, maybe, acquire some experience on the ground. So what advice, would you give to people like us?
So, something that I've seen in the tech industry, even among men, even among women, among most people, it doesn't matter what gender you are, has been there's a sense of, oh, I don't come from this world. I'm not a programmer, and therefore I don't know anything about it. Like almost this sense of self-defeatism around the role of tech in your life. So I find it strange that, if you've chosen to make this particular field your career, you should be more open to the idea. So it shouldn't just be, I don't know anything about it, somebody else would do it. And it shouldn't be on the other extreme as well, which is that I don't have to do it or know about it. Somebody else will I can pay for that. So I think that for people who may not have been exposed to a certain level of technical proficiency, they should just keep an open mind, and learn from the people around them. They should do short courses wherever they can online. There are many free resources. They should know and understand that the technology community at large are mostly geeks who do not condescend. They do not look down on you for not knowing something. In fact, all of them, I find, are very, very eager to teach as long as you ask. So ask and do things and try things out. You don't have to be an amazing programmer, but everybody should be at least some kind of tech literate in their life sense.
Absolutely.
Just to give you a little bit of context, I had to basically switch on all of Mel's technology, even though every bit of it is something she owns. I had to set it up for her. So,
but I'm still podcasting.
One step at a time.
And so yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Tiny baby steps. And so we've talked a little bit about the foundation in India and also about WOBE, and you've talked about these ways that you've come up with these ideas from, observing and seeing something in the world that isn't quite right. But how do you select the right idea to pursue in terms of turning an idea into something real?
Yeah, so this has something to do as well with how, every time you read a blog about how you should quit your job and go and travel the world, find your passion and all that stuff, it ties into this topic because for me, there are many things that I'm extremely passionate about, but I'm not about to go and set up a business for each one of them. I would probably go bankrupt a few times over. I'm very passionate about food. I'm never going to open a restaurant. I'm pretty sure of that. I love craft alcohol. I probably won't ever become a bartender or a whiskey distiller. So for me, it was about finding that intersection between my passion, but also the resources that I had available on that particular topic. Technology was something that had been in my life for an extremely long time. It had been there with me since I was a child, trying to fix computer parts together. I knew a thing or two about it, perhaps a little bit more than others. And I was able also from my travels and some of the community work that I did to go and call up the other resources that I didn't have at the time. If I needed programmers to work with me, I had met them in India doing the work at the foundation. If I needed investors, I had met so many of them just very socially and casually without having to ask them for money back when I was just doing organizing work, trying to get the tech community together. So it's a function of passion, but also how likely are you to not starve doing this, and how likely are you to keep doing this knowing that when the money runs out, when you're extremely depressed, which always does happen on an entrepreneurship journey, that you're still going to be able to pull yourself up and go, okay, I'm going to fix this problem right now. And it has to be because of some form of a superhuman obsession with that particular thing that you're trying to do. So I always say that, back a few years ago, 1 or 2 years back, there were a lot of tech startups that were getting funded for really stupid things, right? Like if I had gone to go and set up a Uber for laundry, I probably couldn't live with myself, and I probably wouldn't be able to wake up in the morning on a very depressing run and say, okay, let's try to make this work. Because fundamentally, I just don't care about laundry, but maybe somebody else does, and they should go and do those things. I care a lot about prepaid phones for some bizarre reason.
And both the projects that you're working on give women the skills to leverage themselves and their and their families out of poverty. But what's the biggest barrier that you have had to overcome as a young woman in the industry?
I think there's a lot of ignorance from many sides of my life. I wear different hats. When I go to tech events, it's always this, oh, you're this bleeding hot liberal who just wants to do these crazy things, which is not really entirely true. But then when I go to NGO events, I feel like this evil capitalist. And so I think the most difficult thing has been about trying to find my place in both sides of the spectrum without tilting too much in the other. In the tech industry, it was very, very difficult at the start to convince people, whether they were future colleagues or investors or anybody else in that industry, that doing what we did could work even if we put women first rather than the profits first. So that was a very difficult balancing act. But lately, there has been some interest in impact investing. There has been more and more people speaking out, people who have been very successful in business, speaking out about how they believe now that the next phase of business is going to be about business with purpose. And I think that I was quite early on trying to put this together, but the idea or the concept had not quite existed yet. So when it happened in other parts of the world with other people, that helped with my mission to get this going.
So so obviously you've got a number of awards under your belt. Like best startup, power woman in fintech, top female entrepreneur of the years, and just the year goes on, and makes me think, what am I doing with my life? But how do you set that next goal when you've already achieved so much? So how do you keep yourself motivated and what's next on your hit list, I suppose?
So I've come around to the idea that it's not about winning awards, that I have to keep working on WOBE and Gyanada. And when I see the first person from Gyanada graduate from university, which could be 5 years from now, because they're very young right now, they're like 7 to 16, or when I see the first family come out of poverty because of what was done at WOBE, that will be when my work is more or less done. It's not about being motivated by awards. Very often these awards come by and it's somebody wanting to give out something and going, hey, can you participate in this? Which is fine and cool and I'll do it. But I think it's important to not be motivated by these things which have no relevance whatsoever to the actual impacts that you're trying to make.
You're just a bleeding heart liberal. That's really...
Pretty much, yeah.
And so, Adrianna, we've actually come to the end of the interview, but something that we ask all our guests is if you could leave one message for the people that are listening that they'll actually really take to heart today. And this could be anything. It doesn't have to be about the causes that you work so passionately on. It can be absolutely anything. What would be the message that you would leave with them?
I would like to speak specifically to people who have been in positions of a lack of privilege, whether they're women, whether they're queer people, trans people, racial minorities. I would like to encourage them to step up and to find allies in the world of business or in the world of social enterprises or whatever it is that you're doing. And I would like them to know that when I was much younger, it was very difficult to envision a world in which I was able to achieve the things that I've ended up doing. It was very difficult. There's no walk in the park. But I would just like them to know that there are people like my peers who are out there who are trying to support them in whatever they do. So I'm hiring for diversity and I'm trying to take some steps to meet people who come from very different walks of life, to see how I can help them and mentor them in their work as well as in their personal lives. So if you have any questions about this, I would love to get an email at skinnylatte@gmail.com.
That's awesome.
Great. So I was just gonna ask that, because I wanted to do a bit of a shout out. So people who actually want to connect with you, I mean, we just heard your email then, but are there any other place that people can go to find a little bit more about you and your work?
Yeah, so I have a personal blog at papagandhi.com, agandhi.com, or they could just send me a message on Twitter at Skinny Latte.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Adrianna, for talking to us today.
Thanks for having me.
So when I actually met Adrianna in person, it was in Singapore, and we were at a funding event, and she really came across as like this business savvy woman. Like, you just looked around the room and her understanding of, investments and the business side of things in the not-for-profit world was just so evident.
And I suppose it's just trying to find your place. So if you're coming, for example, I came from the corporate world as well, and you're coming across to the non-for-profit sector or vice versa. It's trying to find your place. Where do you fit in?
And dealing with people's expectations of what you should look like.
Exactly. Because, we do tend to put a label on people, and it's just interesting to be able to fit beautifully within the two worlds, I suppose. And I think also this comes back to, I think the non-for-profit sector has a lot to learn from businesses, and potentially, the social enterprise sector, this is exactly what we're trying to achieve, is we're trying to look at model in the business world that are working well in terms of how we raise funds for our project and bring that across to the non-for-profit sector.
Yeah, but I also think that what Adrianna pointed out was that businesses also have a lot to learn from not-for-profits, insofar as how to actually facilitate meaningful giving, or, for lack of a better term, meaningful goodness into their business.
Yes.
And she used the term the rise of business with purpose, which I just love. It says exactly what it is without saying more than it needs to.
Exactly. And that's coming back as well to, we're talking about bringing things across from sector to sector, and that comes back between the difference between the expectation of your donor and the expectation of your investor in a business context.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I took away that Adrianna was talking about. It really struck a chord with me about donors' expectations and the sort of lack of trust that you can feel as a fundraiser or as a champion of your cause, that your donors don't quite trust you, despite the fact that you are experts in the field to spend the money wisely and accordingly, versus, say, a business investor who says, here is the money, as long as you're making good returns, we don't really care how you're doing it. Whereas in the not-for-profit sector, you're constantly reaffirming your purpose and reaffirming every line in your expenditure. But when in actual fact, we're good at what we do, so please give us your money, give us your trust.
Definitely. And the other day we were talking about, this is a little bit like the show on TV, Shark Tank, and we were talking about they don't need to justify, you need to build your business case, but once your business case is built, then as long as the numbers stack up, then you don't need to prove as much to your investors. So it's an interesting discussion, but I think there's a lot both sectors have a lot to learn from each other, and again, this is where the social enterprise model is interesting.
Absolutely. But as a fundraiser, Mel, I just feel like I'm constantly just saying, give me money, because we're good.
Show us the money. Thank you so much for listening to our episode today.
If you've enjoyed the episode, please head to iTunes and rate us, or head over to our Facebook page, The Human Factor, and hit like and join in the conversation. Tell us about what you thought of our first episode, and if you have any thoughts or insights to add to anything Adrianna said today, please leave us a comment.
Or you can tweet us at _Human Factor, or visit the website at humanfactor.com.au and leave us a voicemail or a message. This show is just one part of a community that wants to affect and grow social change. So if you have a topic or a person you'd like us to feature on the show, please let us know. Or if you'd like me to coach you or your team on how to build your tribe, please email me at melanie@humanfactor.com.au.
Thanks for listening. See you next time.